curriculum where the government requires teachers to teach kids that someone was heroic was everyone who died at the Alamo. And that's just one example of how politics has always gotten in the way of teaching the actual Texas history and not the myth.
Yeah. Speaking of actual Texas history, my colleague Shawn here, I was proud to, surf his wave as he was helping lead the charge to get the African American History Monument, finalized and on the Capitol grounds. But your book shines a light on the fact that millions of Black Texans today are the descendants of Black Americans and non-Americans, of course, who were brought to Texas against their will. Mm-hmm. And this is a story that's not currently told in the story of Texas independence. So as we think about educating the rising generation of Texans, how do we make sure to tell the story of Black Texans, their shared sacrifice and our shared history?
Yeah, when we talk about the 300, the original colonizer, people who came to the Austin colony, we never talk about the people they brought. And at one time, in the run-up to the Texas Revolution, a very high percentage, I think a quarter of everyone who wasn't a quarter of all immigrants, shall I say, or residents actually of Mexican Texas were enslaved Africans, people. And then that shot up, the percentage of people who were slaves in Texas shot up when we became a republic, because for the 10 years Texas was a republic, it was the most extreme slaveocracy in the entire world. There was no chance of emancipation. If you were a free Black man and you stepped foot into Texas, you were instantly enslaved because the Texas Constitution did not allow for a free Black person. And then we get to the story, the big fight we're having about all history. Like, do we teach Texas history as bad or good, which I think is a reductionist. I think, like all of our history, we don't have to teach that we're inherently sinful or that we were born pure. I think we can teach our history as one long redemption story that, to the extent that they knew they didn't do good back in the day, and we're doing better now. And we keep trying to do better. And I think that's a history that includes us all. And it's a way to teach seventh graders about the bad part of our history without it coming across like we're trying to run Texas down.
This is Deconstructing Dallas. We're with Jason Stanford, co-author of Forget the Alamo. When we come back after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about this fascinating book that he's written with his co-authors. And so hang with us through the break. Deconstructing Dallas. Shawn Williams, Ryan Trimble. We'll be right back right after this.
Do you have a product or service you want to promote? Want to reach a slice of Dallas that needs to hear about you? Give us a shout. Here at Deconstructing Dallas, we love to promote our clients and the best local companies that are here in our fair city. So what are you waiting for? Email us today at deconstructingdallas@gmail.com and get your product on the interweb airwaves today.
Welcome back, Deconstructing Dallas. Ryan Trimble, Shawn Williams. We are with Jason Stanford, co-author of Forget the Alamo. I suggest you probably buy it at Amazon or in your local bookstores, because it does not sound like the Dallas Public Library is going to be the place for that right now. Jason, I wanted to just look at the Alamo again. As you guys mentioned, the actual story of the Alamo, what really happened, is so much better than the myth that many of us grew up on. But I was interested, even for you, what were some of the characters, what were some of the stories that were part of the Alamo narrative that you guys researched that stood out to you?
Yeah, well, two big things. It's all that happens after the Alamo. I mean, we got into the research and we realized real quickly that we weren't interested in writing a book that just debunked the line in the sand or something like that, or even the fact that they all fought to their death and no one was running. That's in there, but that's not really the point of the book. The point of the book became how the myth was created and how politics has been enforcing it all along. And we were shocked to find out what happened at UT, where they hired some suspect South Carolinian history professor who didn't toe the Southern line as faithfully as they wanted. And they actually had a big legislative hearing on how history was taught at UT, and that the specific and explicit instructions from the legislature were that it had to adhere to the Southern story. And so how the Alamo has been caught up in the teaching of Texas history as a symbol of what essentially was the pre-Confederacy. And we're fighting that now to the extent where, and it's one of those things, when like journalists were investigating Trump and then he would just tweet it out. It's like we were looking into this and all of a sudden the legislature amends their bills to protect Confederate monuments and adds the cenotaph at the Alamo. Like, yes, that's a Confederate monument. They just did it there in the legislature. It was just shocking how both obvious and current that fight was, that we thought it was going to be ancient history.
Yeah, speaking of history, I wanted to jump back to the Tejano contribution at the Alamo. I thought that part of the history is so rich and so interesting, and just the history of Mexico itself is so interesting. But you discuss how Mexican Americans feel going through seventh grade history, and I was wondering what the reception has been for your book, Forget the Alamo, in the Latino community.
Dude, LULAC's going to give us a proclamation or something. So yeah, one of their leaders from LULAC, they had a fight at the cenotaph with militia guys, right? And it was one of those things where they both showed up to yell at each other. And the militia guys had semi-automatic rifles. And one of the LULAC guys held our book. And they feel like for the first time, the establishment has heard them, because they've been telling this story for a long time. Yeah, it's not like the Hispanics in Texas didn't notice when, Juan Seguin was run out of San Antonio, and when Southern Tejano ranchers were dispossessed of their land and turned into migrant workers. This is, there are so many immigrants who come from Mexico over the last 100 years to Texas, and they know how the story's told in Mexico. There's a great scene that I couldn't get in the book where Juani Torres, who ran Ron Nuremberg's campaign, she was a little girl in San Antonio and she saw that IMAX movie, and her mom, who's a Mexican immigrant, chaperoned. And they're watching this movie and her mom's saying, oh, that's not the way it happened. So, this has been largely a heroic Anglo narrative that has played with white audiences and has alienated Hispanic Texans for generations. And sometimes, there's a whole bunch of guys who we talked to said they went into the Alamo on the field trip as a Texan and they came out as a Mexican. And that Texas history teaches kids who's the good guys and the bad guys largely along racial lines, and it has for a long time. Recently, of course, we've got Hispanic lawmakers trying to get the Tejanos written back into the history. But there isn't a big push on, they want to be the good guys too. There hasn't been a big political push to try to tell the whole history. And I'm encouraged by some shots of the House Democrats who were up in DC on the plane. At least one state rep we were their airport reading. So maybe a new generation of Texas politicians are ready to tell the whole story.
Obviously the Daughters of the Revolution have played an outside role in this story. And one of my favorite stories revolves around the rivalry between Adina DeZavala and ClaraDriscoll. It was a very fascinating part of the book. What stood out to you about this particular story and this particular part of the history?
Man, first of all, if you ever have a chance to see to the maintenance and care of a historical site, don't put a lineage organization in charge of it. That's putting politically connected ladies in charge of a historical site has not worked well for the Alamo, and it was really irresponsible for a long time. But it was a political decision. So what stood out about the Adina DeZavala versus ClaraDriscoll fight over the Alamo is that is the fight we are still having today. Adina DeZavala was all about historical preservation. She wanted to preserve the long barrack. She wanted to build back up the second floor because it had been turned into some grocery store by the time that she started looking at it. ClaraDriscoll wanted the Alamo to be the centerpiece of a downtown garden park along the lines of what she'd seen in Europe on her honeymoon. And she had the political connections and she had the money. I didn't know what a huge figure ClaraDriscoll was to politics, though. At the centennial in 1936, she got FDR to come down and see the Alamo. And his comments about the Alamo went around the whole country and really introduced the Alamo as a national political symbol. And when LBJ first ran for Congress, he bragged that he was supported by ClaraDriscoll. So her political influence really had a big effect on this country. And it started with the Alamo. Well,
speaking of influence, I'm sure you have some smaller podcasts that you're going to visit besides Deconstructing Dallas. I know this is a huge moment for you to get on our show, but
it is.
But I guess what's next for you? Do you see yourself, getting down, advocating for change at the SBOE, writing another book, standing outside the Alamo with a copy of your book, next to the rodeo? What's next?
So one thing that shocked me is how we have now entered the story. We ended this book. The last scene of it is in March 2020. It includes lines from Trump's last State of the Union. And now the politicians we were writing about in the book are fighting about us. And, we talk about how Dan Patrick's support or opposition of the plan largely was dependent upon his primary politics. When George P. was thinking about running against him, he hated the plan. When George P. turned to run against Ken Paxton, he loved the plan. And now he hates our book and is trying to create a little panel at UT where they can, a little show trial, where they can debate us about the book, just like they did 100 years ago with UT when they were worried about how they were teaching it. So I don't know that I'm going to be done with the Alamo as quickly as I thought I would, because we're now part of the fight we were writing about. And there's going to be, for the foreseeable future, speaking engagements and public fights about it. So I've got other writing things I want to do. I screwed up and had an idea for a new book the other day that my editor thinks bears some investigation. So at some point, maybe I'll have some weekends and vacation back to devote to a new book.
Well, for those of us who may want to watch you as you're doing, participating in all this and part of this discussion, how can our listeners follow you? How can they find you? We'd love to know about ways to keep up with you and even keep in touch.
Oh, that's so nice. Okay, so the easiest thing to do is to go to jasonstanford.substack.com, find my Substack newsletter called The Experiment. It's free, goes out every week. And you'll know everything that's going on there. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm JAS Stanford. And I'm sure I'm on Instagram somewhere posting vacation pictures, but that's about it.
Well, Jason, we certainly appreciate the time today and look forward to seeing it all continue to play out. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed this.
All right. This is Deconstructing Dallas. Ryan Trimble, Shawn Williams. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Deconstructing Dallas, Ryan Trimble, and of course, Shawn Williams. Shawn, it's a great conversation with Jason. Really appreciate his time. Really appreciate his comment that he made off air at the end of the podcast, which was that this is one of the, I believe I'm going to quote it and say, this is, quote, one of the best produced podcasts he's been on.
You know exactly what he said. Both of us, we're just kind of all right, see, we're not just patting each other on the back now.
Yes.
We got a co-signer on this.
You cannot get out of an episode of Deconstructing Dallas without hearing us congratulate
or
each other.
Allen Media meeting.
Right.
With us congratulating each other.
Right. But Congratulations to our guest today, and look forward to keeping track of what happens and